let me just say from the outset, it is so refreshing to be in a room with so many sane people.
So good.
It's something we don't get to experience all that often these days in modern Ireland. We want to discuss some hot button issues because you travelled a long way and you paid good money. We wouldn't sell you short. So I'm going to get the ball rolling, and we're going to start off with a topic which is very close to my heart, very close to your hearts, and it's definitely very close to the festival's heart. And that is the topic of censorship, the topic of cancellation, the topic that we're all living and breathing every day in our mainstream media, in what the government is trying to do to us, and what they're trying to silence, and what they're trying to cancel, like festivals like this. They don't want days like this to happen. They don't want people like us to get together. Because where would that type of thing lead? First, I'd like to go to Una, senior counsel, an expert, one of the leading legal minds in the country, and not alone that. Una has many strings to her bow. She's also one of the leading experts in geopolitics. You have come to cancel culture's attention up close and personal, so you know rather a lot about this new situation we have in modern Ireland, where people can be literally cancelled, deplatformed, airbrushed out of the media, out of your job, out of society, for merely having the wrong opinion. And what's even worse, for having that opinion and actually stating it. Una, give me your thoughts on cancel culture and censorship in modern Ireland.
Well, thank you, Derek. I have to say, unfortunately, that censorship and cancel culture is still alive and well in modern Ireland. But I'm living proof of the fact that even when you have been cancelled personally, as I was, you can rise again. And the fact that you're all here today is also living proof of that. So it really doesn't matter. It's just a blip. It's just a little blip on the road. It's inconvenient, but when you have enough support, when you have enough strength, when you have enough resolve, you will and you can and you will get over it. So that's what I will say. I was probably the first professional to have been cancelled in Ireland. In fact, and it's so interesting because it's exactly 5 years ago to the day when I stood outside the Custom House in Dublin, and I had the audacity, it seems, to stand up to try to warn people about the dangers of their government and how they were imposing a flawed PCR process on the people in order to lock down the people. So I was the first person to call out the PCR test in Ireland. It was the basis of the lockdown, and it was a flawed basis. And nobody realised that. So I knew people were being deceived by the government, and I wanted to warn them. I also wanted to warn them about the dangers of wearing masks, which I knew was coming down the road for children. And I had a real problem with that. But it went ahead, notwithstanding. But in my innocence, I thought I was just, exercising my right to freedom of expression, which is a right that is still, thankfully, enshrined in our Constitution. But that right is not and has not been respected by our government and by the authorities. So they literally went for me that night. It started on social media, and then it went on to mainstream media. And there were two government ministers in particular, Helen McEntee and Roderick O'Gorman, who started publicly tweeting about me and calling for me to be investigated. So I was ridiculed, I was defamed, I lost my jobs, I lost my career, I lost my income, and I was cancelled by the establishment. And, just to remind you of what can happen. So that happened to me, but look, I'm still here today. That's the important point. And the reason why I'm here today is because of the support I got from many of you people here in the audience. You know who you are. And once you have support, and once we can come together and support one another, we can really overcome anything. I mean, the fact that we're here today, given what happened in Drumshanbo, is proof of it. There is an amazing lady who owns this hotel who was not prepared to bow to pressure, and she deserves every credit. These are the people who are and will make Ireland great again, and it's great to have them. And the bottom line is that there is always another way. So when they try to take you down and they close one door, always remember there are other doors. And even if it doesn't seem like there's another door, you can always create one.
Now, I'd like to go, if I may, over to Louise. Louise is an independent journalist. She writes excellent articles on Substack. If you are into the Substack thing, definitely check her out. You won't be disappointed. Now, Louise has worked in the mainstream media, the dreaded mainstream media, the beast. And she has worked there at times, and she has worked freelance at times, and she has covered a lot of ground. And I want to come to Louise, if I may, on this subject, because I'd like a perspective. As far as I'm concerned, possibly as far as you're concerned, the mainstream media in Ireland is rotten to the core. It has abandoned its core function. It has abandoned we the people. They are supposed to be holding, speaking truth to power on our behalf, and they have stopped doing that, as far as I'm concerned. Louise, you worked in the belly of the beast. You worked in the mainstream media. You rubbed shoulders with these so-called journalists who get paid way too much money for far too little, and what they do is damaging. Louise, give me your thoughts on, is the mainstream media broken? Is it fit for purpose? Or is it, as I believe and many others believe, just simply now another arm of the regime? As one of the few remaining journalists, and I use that term specifically because you are a journalist in the real sense of the word, and journalists must have integrity, and you have integrity. Is the system broken? And if it's broken, can it be fixed?
Yes, the system is broken. The fourth estate has to function properly in order for democracy. It's not. So the system of democracy that we have in operation in Ireland at the moment, it's not functioning. It is, as you say, unfortunately, just another arm of the propaganda machine. It's funny that you were talking about being cancelled. I was never anything anyway, so there was nothing to cancel, so praise God. I was spared that. But I did lose my job over it, which I'll come to in a minute. The entire thing turned during COVID. We lost the media then. They went full scale, all for this COVID story, which was the story. And I remember I'd head off to Doolin in the mornings for my swim, and I would be listening to Morning Ireland, and it'd be COVID, 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 COVID. Then you get a break, and you'd be like, oh, I'd love to hear an ad now. And the ad was for COVID, COVID, COVID. So it was just insane what they did to people. That fear, you began to see it. I began to see it on my neighbours' faces and in people's eyes. And that's when I got afraid, when I saw other people being so affected by it. And people have asked me, had I seen this in action before? And I think probably the most important time that I saw it in action was during the abortion referendum, still a highly controversial topic. But we, as a pro-life, I'm Catholic and I'm pro-life, and a journalist, which isn't an unusual mix. As a journalist, it was the exact same as COVID. I wasn't allowed to tell any stories that might turn a person or give them a better understanding of what was happening at the referendum and what could happen. We were just shut down. And it was amazing to me that all of my own colleagues started to change their profile pictures to repeal. Everything was repeal, and all the money that was coming at that. And I remember that I did it then on my Facebook, just, for as an experiment. And oh my God, there was 3 weeks, 3 weeks of intense vitriol and hatred. And honestly, you always know, everything becomes clearer. It's funny. You always know you're dealing with the demonic when they're raging with you. They're raging with you. They hate your faith and they hate my faith. And it was interesting to see what the Mayo News published yesterday. Brídi ní Farraig Joyce is her name, in the byline under this story that was written about Mise Éire and what the people of Castlebar feel about Mise Éire. What she picked out about me was that I had written an article and it was about the desecration of the Child of Prague. This was this Mayo Pride group who obviously are funded by the government. They had given money to these organisers who had painted up the Child of Prague in trans colours and eyeliner on it and everything, like an absolute hate crime against the Child of Prague, against my faith, desecration of my faith. So I called it out in a Substack. And subsequently, the Mayo Pride had to apologise. That's what this so-called reporter had to select as my heinous crime. Therefore, I am far right and fascist. Like, it is funny. Like, you have to kind of laugh at this ridiculous nonsense that goes on. What's the solution? Okay, as somebody who worked 20 years ago, this year I got my first job as a little cub reporter in a local paper up in Dublin, and worked the hard way up. I was interested in the stories. I was not interested in being the story, which is why I find it hard to do this kind of thing. There are still good people working in the media. Silence. The silence. I think there are. And it's our responsibility to turn them. It's our responsibility to turn it back on them, to say, listen, you need to do your job. There was a time when journalists would take on board both sides of the story. So yeah, they might laugh at one or poo-poo the other, but that was their responsibility. And I think, obviously, the likes of herself there in the Mayo News is a bit of a lost cause. We may not bother. But there are decent journalists still out there who are interested in telling the truth. And I'll tell you what the problem is, and then I'll finish up. Sorry, Derek. We cannot get anything past editorial. It's like I mentioned during the abortion referendum. If I pitch a story, the story has to get past the editor. If the editor says no, there's no story. It doesn't go any further than that. It's just an idea in my head, and that's the end of that. The same happened with COVID. And it was through that pushing the editor and people that I was interviewing and talking to that I lost my job. And that was for asking, we need to cover COVID vaccine injuries. And I think Stephen Kerr actually has been a genius at it. He's conducted himself so well. And he hasn't really put a foot wrong. He called the first public meeting here, I remember, into what was going on in Brafey. And I was sitting here watching him in action. He is a good example if you're looking for somebody to follow who's been thorough and diligent and consistent and brave, and everything that he's done it with such heart. So fair play, Stephen.
Well said. Bravo. And I echo those thoughts. It's absolutely amazing work from Stephen and Suzanne to not only come up with the concept, which I think is very important, but despite the tsunami of hate that was spewed, despite every possible attempt to derail the project, as you see in the Drumshambo incident, they managed to push through, because when you are on the side of right, it's effortless. Pushing is effortless because you just have the wind at your back automatically and naturally. And that's what we all feel, I think, in this room here. We are on the side of right, and going on the right path is so natural, it's effortless. John has written 9 books. John, still 9?
Still 9.
9 books, and they cover a range of topics. And we all have this idea of the world as we think it is, as we've always been told it is. Certain narratives are just given truths. They aren't always. You'd be amazed at how many things that you think you know that you don't really know the truth of. And John has been doing Trojan work, digging digging in deep to some of these topics. And what it has to do with this topic is, John, the UK, if I may say, with regards to cancellation and censorship, is in an even worse position than us.
Well, that's kind of difficult to define. It's a good question. But yeah, I mean, obviously, the population mix is greater. You know, the population size is greater, and probably the mix is greater as well because of that. But yeah, I think it's the same across Europe, to be honest. And I think it's, you know, what's going on. There is no argument against the truth, right? In my view, no argument against the truth. The only way they can stop the truth coming out is through censorship and cancellation. If they were able to argue against our points, our valid points that we're constantly making, there would be no censorship. So it kind of proves that what we're all about in this room is the truth. My discipline is history. Okay, I'm a student of history. I'm a student of Irish history as well. And by the way, I want to get this in because I mean it sincerely. I absolutely love this country and its people. Yeah, I mean, I've been cancelled many times, as I said. I've had street demonstrations against me in a little town in Gloucestershire called Stroud, and they've forced me to not speak. And it was just such an innocent topic. I can't even remember what it was now. But it wasn't even anything mega controversial. It was just that my reputation preceded me, and they didn't want John Hamer sullying their beautiful place by telling the truth. It's a very, very difficult concept for the people who are, you know, not on our side. I know that's a very strange thing to say, not on our side, but they're really not. They cannot grasp the concept of truth. They're very, very big on irony, you know, but I don't think they've ever understood what the irony actually means. I don't think the word irony has ever crossed their vocabulary. Because they accuse us of doing the very self-same things that they do. You know, they constantly, well, they're haters. You know, they're haters, and yet we're the haters. You know, but they cannot see the irony in that. And, you know, I find that a very, very difficult concept. But yeah, as Derek said, I've written lots and lots of books, 9, on various different topics, about history, science, just about anything in the world that is going on that they're not telling the truth about. And that is just about everything. We're in the middle of an information war. Okay, it's not a war with guns and bombs and tanks. It's an information war. The problem that we have as a group, not just in Ireland, I'm talking, you know, internationally, is that we have no platform. You know, we've just been told about the mainstream media and how that operates. The mainstream media is the organ of our enemies. Yeah, they have almost a 100% monopoly on what information goes out to the general public. The problem that we have is that we have no platform. We've got minor platforms. We've got, you know, a few podcasters. We've got, you know, people who write books like myself. But it's like a pinprick on the back of an elephant compared to the mainstream. So this is the problem that we face. So what I say to people is, you just got to tell people. It's hard, it's a tough job, nobody wants to do it, but you've got to keep pushing that message. There is a phenomenon which scientists are aware of, they accept, but they cannot explain it. And that is that, and use the monkeys as an example, okay, because that's where the word came from. Let's say a group of monkeys in a jungle somewhere in Africa develop a new skill, and that skill might be using a stone to break open coconuts. I don't know, just plucking stuff out of the area. And they then teach it to their offspring, they teach it to their family group, and that spreads. And eventually, metaphorically speaking, once that 100th monkey knows this skill, suddenly and incredibly, every single monkey of that species somehow acquires that skill, whether it's telepathic or whatever, we don't know. But anyway, that's kind of a broad brush explanation. But how we relate it to ourselves is that we will eventually reach a point where instead of there being a few hundred people in this room, there'll be thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in rooms all over the country and all over Europe and the world. And once we reach that 100th monkey syndrome, suddenly everyone in the world will understand exactly what is going on. And once that happens, the perpetrators of these evil crimes will have absolutely nowhere to go.
The monopoly that the state now has over the information war, that is to say, they control essentially the mainstream media by various means, mostly financial. Is there a way out of this in your mind, or do you have any suggestions about how we, the people, can take back the narrative, can get the truth out?
Well, in many ways, we're doing that already, those of us who have YouTube channels and are using social media, because obviously we can't influence the media. As Louise has said, the fourth estate, that's their ethos. They are supposed to hold the government to account. That is their job. And they are not doing it. It's outrageous. And in fact, they are part of the system. And this is the reason why nothing can get done, why we're all being bombarded with propaganda all the time. And it's a disaster for those of us who are not awake, because people are believing the lies and the propaganda of the media. So there's nothing we can do except maybe appeal to the good conscience of those journalists that Louise has assured us are in the system and want to speak the truth and spread the truth and write about the truth. But there is this problem with the editorial process that they have to get over. But in that situation, then what happens? People need to leave the system and set up their own newspapers, their own periodicals. They have to set up their own news networks. And we need to come together to do that. I know there are moves afoot. I hear them in the background. And of course, like everything else, it requires funding to set up these independent news networks where the truth will be spoken. I hope to be involved in some of those as we move forward. But obviously we're up against it without funding, because this government has access to unlimited funding, and they're using that funding to give to the mainstream media money so that the mainstream media only report on what the government want them to do. I mean, almost last year alone, RTE were given almost €1 billion by the government. So how do you think they're going to react to stories from the government? Do you think they're going to have people like me speaking? Not at all. When I ran in the elections last year, I wasn't allowed on any mainstream media. And this is the reason why. And so therefore, we cannot rely on the existing systems. It's what I said about the doors. If the doors are closed to you, you find a new door, you make a new door, you create a new door. So in many ways, we're doing that. We've experienced, especially in the last 5 years, the advent of what I call the citizen journalist. And for me, it's absolutely phenomenal watching these amazing people. Some of them are lorry drivers, grandfathers. They're taking to TikTok and they're explaining what their views are about things. And I think it's absolutely marvelous, because it's really empowering the people. And these people are speaking about truth because they know that others are not getting it from mainstream media. So I do think if anybody has any influence with the diaspora, we need to bring the diaspora into this struggle, especially in the States, because I do believe that we would get the support and we would get the funding. I'm thinking about all that funding that's been going to Sinn Féin, that's been wasted. It needs to be given to people like us, the truth seekers, the truth speakers, so that we can take Ireland out of this dreadful mess that it's in. We're like Ireland Inc. now is like a runaway train that's about to career off a cliff. And, you know, if you knew all the things that I know, we're probably not going to get to talk about most of them today, but I think many of you will have a good sense of what's going on. And the situation is very serious and very catastrophic, and we have a government who's out of control and is not going to be able to manage this. So we need to just be steady and strong, support one another, look for the support from the diaspora. I think you will get it. So if anybody has any influence, please use it.
As Una said, it's going to have to be from the bottom up. It's going to have to be grassroots. It's going to have to be us here, you there, all doing whatever we can do in any way we can, even if it's a small thing. Talk to somebody, relatives abroad. Talk to your relative in New York. Explain to them how things are now. Because a lot of people don't realise how Ireland has changed. They still think it's the Ireland of the 70s and the 80s. It's not. We know that because we live here. But a lot of people who have moved abroad over the years don't realise it. So every one of us in this room can do something. Even if it's just talking or having a conversation and bringing the topic up and explaining it to people. Now, I was born into an Ireland of just under 4 million people. And it'd been that way for quite a while, and it stayed that way for quite a while. And I never remember it feeling empty. I never remember going outside my front door or front gate and thinking, God, where's all the people? It's a bit empty around here. Not much going on. Tumbleweeds going down the street. None of that. Wasn't like that. It was a lovely place, wonderful place. We now have 5.5 million people here. And I think it's higher. I can't prove it, but I suspect they're not even telling us the truth about that. Now, that's with a birth rate, last time I checked, of about 1.4 for native Irish people. So you don't have to be an economics wizard to understand how we got to 5.5 million. The question is, what's going on there? Is it working out as intended, if there even was an intention? I think it's chaotic, and I don't think chaos is a good way to run a country. But I want to put it to each of my fellow panelists. What is going on with this seeming attempt to artificially pump up the population of this country by any means necessary? Louise, we seem to be a runaway train as regards growing population, even though as a people we're not having any kids. What's your thoughts on that?
I suppose it's a massive effort to dilute our culture, to subvert our culture, to subvert our beliefs. And I think, again, obviously everything that I say is shaped through my faith, Catholicism. And I think that you'll see Catholicism come more and more under attack now. And I think if you look back, RTE did a great number on this country, because a lot of the hatred for Catholicism came from RTE. And that was the first great psyop that they pulled off. And a lot of people still don't understand how deeply that has affected the Irish nation. What they want us to do is divert back into hatred. They want us to hate those people, the immigrants who are coming in. They want us to show that hatred. And I say resist at all costs. Resist what they want you to do, because you're falling into their trap. And that's not the way.
John, you have the same issue in the UK as we have here.
Of course.
You have a big immigration situation, both legal and illegal. Many people, if not most people, are not on board with it. The regime aren't listening.
No.
Does that remind anybody here of anything? What is going on, John?
Right. The reason for all this mass immigration of non-whites into Europe in general, specifically the UK and Ireland, is something called the Kalergi Plan. Now, the Kalergi Plan, for those who are not aware, was actually formulated in 1924 by a gentleman, and I use that term very loosely, by the name of Richard Coudenhove Kalergi, and he was of the Jewish persuasion, okay? And what his idea was, and it was quickly taken up by the powers that be, or the powers that shouldn't be, as I like to call them, it was to flood Europe over a long period of time, and we're seeing the kind of the end game now, or almost the end game now. In the UK, most of the immigrants are young, single men. Not families, which, you would expect that to be the case from all these deprived countries, ridden with war and famine and poverty. It's absolutely nothing to do with war and famine and poverty. They're here to replace us. And I'm sorry if that upsets anyone, but I can only speak as I find. My research tells me this. And that is the top and bottom of immigration, as I see it.
Is there a solution to this problem?
Again, it's an information war, isn't it? We can't fight them. You know, we can't fight them. We don't have the manpower or the woman power to actually physically fight them. We need to tell everyone that we can in whatever tiny way that we can. You know, as I said, I write books. Everybody, no matter how small, has a part to play. If we want to reach the 100th monkey syndrome, it's about information, and it's about making that information effective and passing it on. I know it's a very, very hard thing to do, because I'm sure you've all experienced, you know, ridicule from family and friends, and people outside your friends and family group as well, as I have. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, but I would say that is the only way that we're ever going to succeed.
What we hear again and again and again, and this plays to your specialties, is this oft-trotted out line, international obligations. We'd love to sort it out, but we just can't. What if, by some manner or means, a real leader was to emerge? A real government. Imagine. I know, it's hard, isn't it? A government that actually was on the side of you and I, on the side of the ordinary Irish person. If by some manner or means a leader, a government emerged like that, could they just do what has to be done and tear up this international obligation farce?
First of all, Ireland does have international obligations, obviously, in respect of any treaties or protocols they've signed, such as the Geneva Conventions, such as the EU, such as EU law, etc. That is true, but there is no doubt about it that there was a period of time when the excuse trotted out by a number of government ministers when they didn't want to deal with any awkward questions was, oh, we have international obligations, and a few smart journalists started asking them for details of the international obligations. They couldn't give them the answers, so they stopped doing that. They stopped with that trick. So they don't rely on it anymore, but certainly we do have obligations. And some of them are relevant to the migration crisis, like the Geneva Protocols and the Geneva Convention on refugees. We need to look at that. It was written for a different time. We've also had, and if we're talking about the subject of migration, I mean, one could spend hours talking about this. It's such a vast topic, but something I need to say to follow up on what John has said. You can go back to the Coudenhove-Kalergi Plan, or you can go back to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and all the rest of it, and you can point to the destruction of the Christian West, which was proclaimed and declared by, you know, dark forces a long time ago, and that certainly is happening today. But we don't need to go back that far, because what many people don't realise is that their own government actually made plans as far back as 2015. One of those plans was Project 2040 Ireland, and it was a vision for the purpose of which was to enable all parts of Ireland, whether rural or urban, to successfully accommodate growth and change. So they knew that this was coming down the line, and the essence of this was that they wanted to have 8 million people, both north and south, by 2040, and 10 million people in Ireland, north and south, by 2050. And at the rate we're going to reach those figures even before those dates. It was essentially a Fine Gael plan. Simon Coveney and Leo Varadkar were two of the main architects of it. So people need to know this, because they've kept this information from you. And yes, we're in an information war, and that's why it's crucial that people gain knowledge and have knowledge and know and understand what's going on, because knowledge is power. When you know the truth about what's going on, that in itself is extremely empowering. If you rely on the 100th monkey principle, just knowing the truth, understanding it, gives you power, which helps to overcome this. So that's why always, whenever I'm at any meetings, I try to give people information and facts so that they can use them to navigate what's going on, because the mainstream media will never, ever tell you the truth. It's always propaganda, and that's why you have to rely on people like myself and the others on this platform. There was a recent ruling of the European Court of Justice to which we are bound. It was in response to a question asked by the High Court, where basically this European court has said that Ireland has obligations to provide accommodation for asylum seekers. And if Ireland doesn't, that Ireland can be sued for compensation. So this is really, really serious. There is no appeal against this. This is it. So what they've done is they've set out the plan for all these people coming in. So we have legal migration, we have illegal migration. Most of us know about the illegal migration, and I'm sure there's lots could be said about that, but you know enough about that already. Much of the legal migration, which is where the state are handing out visas and work permits like confetti at a wedding. And many of these people are coming in on DEI programs by big multinationals. That's diversity, equity and inclusion programs. And as a consequence, the native Irish people are losing out and our young people are having to go abroad to work. It's outrageous. And then these people are coming in and they're outbidding our young people for houses. And they can't buy houses. So they can't buy houses, they can't work, they have to leave. And in the meantime, these people are coming in. Our birth rates have declined. We've excess deaths running at 23%. Abortions were at 10,000 a year. They're at 10,000 a year at the moment. We will be replaced sooner than we think. It's a really serious problem, and we're going to end up being a minority in our country because of our obligations. And last year, as some of you will know, I ran on the platform of sovereignty when I ran in the European elections, and I urged everybody to get their TDs to vote against the EU Migration Pact, because this is so serious. One of the legislative measures of that pact will mean that we will give authority for unelected bureaucrats in Brussels to bring, relocated asylum seekers to Ireland. We won't have any control over the numbers. If we don't bring them in, we will have to pay a sum of €20,000 per asylum seeker in perpetuity. We have lost control of our borders. We no longer have sovereignty when it comes to inward migration. We have the government supporting legal migration, and we have the government doing nothing to stop the illegal migration. They could easily stop it by having detention centres, by using the Immigration Act, by closing our borders. They could have stopped it by not voting in the EU Asylum and Migration Pact, but they did none of that. Why? Because they have a plan. That's the reason. They've set the systems in place effectively where they've got the numbers. They've planned for the numbers. They've created the circumstance for the numbers because they haven't utilised the existing laws to act as a deterrent. They could easily have done that if they'd set up detention centres under the reception directive. If they had applied the law in which they were supposed to, this would all have acted as a deterrent for international protection applicants. But they've done the exact opposite, because it's clear to me they want them to come in, because this will destabilise our country, because multiculturalism does not work. And there are many studies which prove this. We're talking here about numbers. We're not talking about individuals. Every single person in this room, myself included, has friends who are non-nationals, who are a great addition to this country, love being here, appreciate Ireland, want to integrate, delighted to be here. We're not talking about those people, but we're talking about the numbers that are coming in. They're unvetted. Nobody knows where they're from. And so this is a problem for people, and it's causing a great deal of confusion, and also it's disrupting the social cohesion of the country, which is really unacceptable. But now you have a problem, so they're coming in numbers. There is insufficient housing to take care of these people. So where are they going to get the housing? Well, they now have the IPAS centres, and they have effectively abandoned the planning laws by creating these IPAS centres, which no longer have to comply with the planning regulations. They're exempted developments. So that's the first thing. And interestingly, they want to bring in proposals for legislation to mean that it will not be possible, essentially, to object to any of these IPAS centres. I want to quote something that this young TD said when he was moving his application to bring in this legislation, which is now past the first stage and is on to the second stage. It should be put on the record that the compulsory acquisition of land is a sensitive issue. It is not always pleasant when people are moved involuntarily from their homes or required to sell their lands. Although we need a streamlined and cost-effective CPO system, that's compulsory purchase order, these landowners are entitled to clarity, transparency and fairness. In other words, you're entitled to know why you're being removed from your property. So this bill provides that and strikes the balance needed to make CPOs work. So this is touted as something that will be used in respect of vacant properties only, but what does that statement by that young TD tell you?
They're coming after your homes. That's the end game. They need to find mechanisms to sidestep the Constitution. A new leader comes in and says, right, give me all the agreements we're signed up to, all the treaties, all the agreements, put it in a spreadsheet, and let me see what's what and who they're with. And you go through all of those, you're right, that's not working, that's a disaster. That didn't work as intended, and that's just damaging us non-stop. Now, a leader then says unilaterally, okay, maybe with their government or whatever way it works, I'm going to suspend all those treaties and arrangements and agreements that we have with the EU, the UN, whoever it is, because they're not working. We don't like them, and they're harming us. Una, from a legal standpoint, one, can it be done? And two, what would happen if it was tried?
Okay, first of all, I don't proclaim to have an expertise in this area. And anyway, I don't think it's ever really been done before, so I don't know. But of course, if you sign up to an agreement, you can always revoke it. There's always a means whereby it could be revoked. But in my view, the most important treaty really that we need to remove ourselves from, or the situation really that we need to remove ourselves from, is the EU, because much of... because so much of what is problematic has and is coming through the EU. And we've ceded so much of our sovereignty now that in reality we are a vassal state of Europe with a government that is nothing more than a mere administrative government. You're being governed from Europe by the unelected monarch, Madame von der Leyen. So that's the situation that I think we're aware of. So look, we have a precedent. We saw Brexit operating in the UK. So there is a model for that, so we could follow that model. But I don't know if the Irish people are ready for that debate yet. Certainly this government will not allow it. Too many people are making too much money out of the EU, but certainly it is something we have to look at, we must look at, and it is one of the solutions. If you ask me for the solutions about how we'll deal with this problem, I agree with you, we need leadership. But what we need, in fact, this government has to go. It's really important it's not replaced by Sinn Féin. They would be 10 times worse. We need to unite the nationalist movement. It's too fragmented. People have to put their differences aside, their egos aside. They must come together, all the independents and the nationalists, for the sake of the country, for the sake of their children and their children's children. They need to unite so that they can form a cohesive unit in the next major election, whenever that will come up. I also think it's really important that we get international election observers to come and oversee the election process, because there is a lot of concern about that process. And the one way to deal with that concern is to have electoral observers. It's quite common. Leaving the EU, we need to close our borders. I mean, the bottom line is the illegal migration will never stop. It will just keep continuing coming up from sub-Saharan Africa, coming south to north. It will come east, west from the Middle East. They'll come to Europe, they'll come to the UK in their dinghies or whatever. They'll drive up to Larne and they'll come across and they'll come right down to Dublin, and there's nothing to stop them. So we need to close our borders or find a way to have some border control in Northern Ireland for starters. But there is no will on the part of this government, because there is a plan to replace us. And that's the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Wise words.